This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Love Letters Live with Janet Galen. And Janet, you have a great guest on today.
Don't I ever? Yes. Thank you. Well, I would like to introduce my guest, Mark Anthony. And, I think most of you know his name, and you might know a lot more than I do about him so far. And I'm just going to start right in. Mr. Anthony, I've known your name for years. And as kind of a background sound and hope and all kinds of things, interest. And recently, I work with people writing love letters. And when I first started, this is kind of an under theme, people frequently write letters to parents and grandparents who are gone from this earth.
Yes.
And the question, my friend Myrna was the first one to ask this, actually. She wrote a letter to her mother, who she loved so much. Her mother died too young. And she wrote this wonderful letter to her mother many years ago, and then said something like, "I know my mother can hear me." And that's kind of an ongoing theme. So my other underlying ongoing theme is a vague familiarity with you and what you do. And then I read that you have a new book out called Evidence, right?
Evidence of Eternity.
That's right. I wanted you to say it. And so I thought, okay, I really need to talk to this man. And so does everybody I know need to hear what you have to say. So I understand that you define yourself somehow both in terms of psychic abilities and as a lawyer. Could you just talk about that for a minute?
Well, I was born into a family where people who perceive spirits is not an uncommon thing. And from what we can tell, people who study mediums and spirit communication, this appears to be a genetic proclivity. And so what's fascinating is both my parents had this. My dad was a U.S. Navy SEAL and a NASA engineer. My mother was a commercial illustrator, and she was a leg model because she had Betty Grable legs. And so she used to model stockings for a department store in New York City. And so when people think of psychics and families, they think of like gypsy fortune tellers, and that certainly is not my family. I've tracked this back to the 1890s, actually on both sides of the family.
I was going to ask you if it went farther back than that. Yes.
It did. My dad's family, they were very waspy Baptists from Pennsylvania. In fact, my great-great-grandfather on his maternal side was actually a Baptist minister, but his grandmother Grace, his mother Isabel, his sister Marjorie, and my dad could all see spirits. And
wow.
Yeah.
Well, but so where did the lawyer come in?
Well, I decided to go to law school, and originally
with an eye toward practicing law.
Well, yeah, of course, and I have practiced law I've tried over 300 jury trials. I've probably represented 10,000 people. Throughout my career, I've been a prosecutor, criminal defense lawyer, complex civil litigation. I'm a member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, the Washington, D.C. Bar, and the Florida Bar. And originally I was going to go into the clergy because it's not unusual for mediums to be drawn to the clergy. But I decided that really wasn't for me because I felt it was too constricting and too limiting. And so, because a lot of people think that, if you're a lawyer, you're this, sociopathic vampire that, it's funny because everything that I do evokes an immediate reaction from people. When I say, you're a lawyer, people are like, and they say you're a medium, they're like, yeah. And it really is a misnomer because the vast majority of attorneys are here to help people.
Oh, of course. And do
because, when do you call a lawyer? Usually not when life is perfect. It's because something terrible has happened to you.
Right.
And certainly I know that from representing people who've been arrested and in terrible
But
injuries.
that's why they call you as a medium also when something jarring has happened.
Well, absolutely. And
Wait, may I just start with something? So
sure.
I was just curious. I don't ever consider what I do an interview, and your office was kind enough to send a list of interview questions. And I thought, that's never part of what I decided to take a look at them the other day, and every single one of them is exactly what I want to know. But I also want to go farther back. Was it hard for you as a child to be a child of people who were seers, who were able to communicate with spirits?
Well, it's hard to get away with anything. Parents have a sixth sense anyway. They're connected to their children, but magnify that by about 4,000 times with my parents. But actually, it was very good because when I started seeing spirits around age 3.5.
Oh, tell me. Okay, stop.
Yeah.
Tell me about the first time you did.
Well, I started talking to my invisible friends. And I remember mom and dad were looking at me, and I remember mom saying, "Oh, he's got it." And my dad was like, "Oh, he's got it." And earlier when I was explaining about my family, my mom's family came over from Italy. And in fact, my maternal great-grandmother was featured in the PBS special, The Italian Americans, as the woman who knew things in the Italian community of New York and New Jersey because of her psychic abilities. So
that was seen as a positive, as a power. Not
right. My mom's family seems a positive. My dad's, and people want to find out more about this. Certainly read my books, Never Letting Go and Evidence of Eternity, because I discuss a lot of the family members who had these abilities. And I remember my dad was very abrupt with me. He said, "Mark, don't talk about this." And I got really scared,
Yeah.
and then he sat down and he said, "Mark," and he could see I was shaking, because daddy never treated me like that. He said, "Mark, people who see things that other people don't get taken away." And he said, "You can talk about this to your mother and I. You can tell us anything, but don't tell people outside of the family." And long story short, Janet, the reason he told me this is that his sister Marjorie, she was married to a religious fundamentalist, and he was going to work one day, and she begged him not to go. She threw a fit because she knew something terrible was going to happen. Yeah. And that day, he used to work in a machine shop at a steel plant in Pennsylvania. I think it was in Harrison, Pennsylvania. And a crane was lifting thousands of pounds of steel beams, and the cable snapped, and it crushed the machine shop and killed everybody in it. So if he'd been there, there's probably about 99% chance he would have been killed. So to repay her, he felt that she was doing something evil and satanic. He had her involuntarily committed to a mental institution and forcibly subjected to electroshock therapy over a period of 6 months. And my Aunt Marjorie, after that, they damaged her brain so much she never was able to perceive spirits again.
It is shocking that the medical people in charge would have gone along with that, because I must say, I've thought of this, and I'm sure half the people in the world have. You have to think about children who have imaginary friends.
Right.
And who are they talking to, and what that means. And haven't we all talked to spirits at some point in our life?
Well, we do every day. And for people who pray, you're doing it every day. Right. I mean, think about it. I was raised in the Catholic faith, and certainly God, and then, Jesus, Mother Mary, the saints and angels. And so there's all these supernatural entities. And for, our colleagues and friends that are Protestant or Jewish and, pray, solely to one God, which is fine, absolutely fine, because, people are communicating with spirits on a daily basis.
But we also actively talk to people who are gone. We talk to our parents and our grandparents. I'm looking up because even that's...
Well, of course, because they're on a higher frequency, a higher vibration. And we do, Janet, and that's an excellent point. I love what you said before about how so many people write love letters to people they know and who they miss. And you know what? The spirits are aware of that.
Okay, so I want to talk to you about that.
Yeah, I figured you might.
that isn't, well, a couple of questions. I read that you, because of your legal background and your psychic background, step in where the two conflict, where there's an issue. How do they conflict? What happens where you have a spirit influence and a legal influence, and they collide. What would that, I couldn't even imagine what that could be.
Well, one of my favorite stories about that, illustrations. I was
Please.
trying a jury trial, and it was before evidence was being taken. This is the part of the trial called jury selection,
Yeah.
and the technical term is voir dire. Although I was practicing in Florida, so it's voir dire.
Yeah.
But it's a French word meaning to speak the truth. And the point is that first the prosecution gets to ask the prospective jurors questions, and then the defense does. And the point is to get the most fair and impartial jury as possible.
Right.
And so during this jury selection, it was in a case, it was a mutual combat. I was representing this big bruiser who got in a fight with another big bruiser. And so the loser filed charges. So, but it was a crime of violence. And I kept getting drawn to this one woman on the the jury panel. And I kept feeling a female spirit around her. And I'm like, okay, I'm in court. You know, this is not when this should be happening. And I'm feeling it tightening around my throat. And so when it was my time to ask questions, I said to the panel, is anyone here been the victim of a violent crime or maybe a family member? Oh my gosh. She started trembling and shaking, and the tears, and she was such a sweet looking person. And I could feel the spirit coming in behind her even stronger. And she started trembling, and she said, a year ago, my sister was in a foreign country when an escaped mental patient strangled her, dismembered her body, and threw her in the trash like she was garbage. And I'm standing there like, you know, and you could hear a pin drop in the courtroom, and my client's like, dude, what are you doing? And even the normally loudmouth prosecutor didn't have anything to say. And I'm thinking, you know, they didn't tell me in law school how to deal with this one. And then I'm getting a visual on her sister behind her. So literally, Janet, I had a foot in our world and a foot in the other side.
What did you do with that?
Well, and if people want to find out what happens, they're going to have to get my book, Never Letting Go.
Okay.
So.
That's good to know. I'm going to get a copy of that. I want to know how do you distinguish when you communicate with the spirits? I don't even know how to phrase this because it's basic and I'm so ignorant. Is it something you see? Can you see a person that's represented by the spirit? Do you hear it or do you feel it? And then you go from there. What is the sense you get?
Different mediums perceive things differently, but I see them, hear them, feel them. I smell things, taste things, know things. I get everything.
But they were when they were living?
Well, what normally happens is when spirits will come in, they will appear the way they did prior to passing.
Right prior
to passing. And the reason for that is that's an identifying characteristic. So if your 95-year-old grandmother comes through looking 22 years old, and I'm describing this 22-year-old with great legs and high cheekbones and all this, and you're thinking, you know, your grandmother is an old lady, used to knit and bake cookies. Right. However, many times, and this has happened to me thousands of times, so I'll be communicating with people who are elderly or very, very diseased and sick when they die. And so they give me the identifiers, and then they morph into these young, beautiful versions of themselves.
Oh, so you're not stuck with as bad as you might have looked if you were sick. You're not stuck with that version
not at all. In fact, we hear about this because in near-death experience, because I speak a lot at the International Association of Near-Death Studies, also had an ND when I was 4, but people talk about they go into the light, you know, they die, they go through the tunnel, they go into the light, and they encounter the spirits of people they know who died, and everybody looks like they're in their 20s or early 30s, and they look beautiful. And the reason for that is because we are actually pure energy. And so our body is just, our brain is just the host for the soul, for the spirit. It doesn't create it. And so the spirit comes into the body, and when the body dies, the soul goes on. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. That's the first law of thermodynamics and physics. That isn't wishful thinking. That's a law of physics. energy doesn't get old, it doesn't get sick, it doesn't get tired, it doesn't die.
You
And
know,
so that's why, yeah. And one time, like one of the times I saw my mother, I mean, my mother was in her late 70s when she died. And all of a sudden there she was, and she looked young and beautiful. And I said, you know, and like, I never saw her that young.
right.
And I said, Mom, you look so beautiful. I go, why do you do that? She said, because I can.
Okay,
And
I want to ask you something about that. I have often, I know this isn't about me, but maybe other people have felt this, and you can answer it. I have often, from the time I was very young, kind of not looked forward to my death because I'm having a wonderful time in my life,
sure.
but to being pure energy.
Yes.
There's always been something so appealing about that.
But that's very interesting, Janet, because you get it. You're understanding this on a subconscious level, because that is what we are. My hero, Albert Einstein, one of my heroes, but he's definitely up there. Albert Einstein said that when it comes to matter, we've got it all wrong. There's no matter. There's just energy which vibrates at different frequencies so as
I
to be
kind of like that.
perceptible to the senses. And so you understand that. And why? Because that is the truth.
I've always kind of felt that, but I have another question. How
Sure.
do you distinguish? I mean, I don't know how many people confess to this, but maybe a lot. You can tell the difference when it's happening to you. You can tell the difference between a dream and what I'm going to call a hallucination, for lack of a better word. That is to say, somebody who's gone appearing right there next to you, not a dream.
Right.
And one of my closest friends died when we were 29. It was horrible. It was just horrible. She'd been sick for a while and horrible. And after about 6 months, this was a dream. I want to know what you make of it. And there we were talking to each other. And after a couple of minutes, I said, Carol, what are you doing here? And she said, I said, well, I don't understand. I mean, what are you doing here? And she said, well, I'm not allowed to tell you. And I said, we've never had a moment in our life together that you haven't told me something. No, I want to know what you're doing here. She said, I will tell you, but you have to promise not to say anything. And I didn't for the next 40 years, by the way. And then I felt not obligated to keep that. And she said, this is how we get to come visit you once we're gone.
Oh, sure.
And
So
it made
that,
sense.
and it felt real because it was real, and it
But
was
I
a
knew it was a
coherent
dream.
conversation. Right. Because how in depth do you want me to get on this explanation?
Well, just start. I mean, we're limited by time. I wish you could be here for a week.
Okay. This is an alignment of frequency with the other side. Let me explain. Spirit communication is not hocus pocus or magic. It's based on sound scientific principles. And we now know that our brain has different frequencies. There's different brain waves. Right now we're in the beta state. That's the awake, rational, get up, tie your shoes, drive your car to work state. But then as we go to sleep, we slip into alpha. That's when you meditate and you get that, I call it the groovy baby feeling. And then you go from alpha to theta, which is deep sleep. And then there's delta, which is like very little brainwave activity. But scientists who've been studying psychic activity find that on the alpha theta border between that euphoric state and sleep, brain waves increase. Spirits see that, they bring their frequency down, you get a frequency match. And that's why they tend to visit us in our dreams, because it's happening naturally. Also, we're more accepting of dreams. I mean, even look in the Bible, all the accounts of, angels, spiritual entities coming to the three wise men to warn them about Herod. And then Joseph, the stepfather of Jesus, spirits coming to him twice. The Old Testament's loaded with prophetic dreams and spirit contact. I know when people use the Bible to crucify me, it's like, really, you really need to read it because it's loaded with this activity. And the thing is that, and this is what we're not sure of, or how this happens. People like me can voluntarily do this in the beta state. So I can go from beta to alpha theta like that. Whereas normally it takes several hours for people in a deep sleep state to get to the point where their brainwave frequency is receptive to the frequency match of a higher vibration.
Then I have two questions.
Okay.
I know this, I'm sure this goes on with you forever, but two things. First of all, it makes sense that that happens at night when you're sleeping, because Lord knows your days are busy enough. And this way you have some time that's unassigned, nighttime when you're sleeping, more or less, to receive these. But also, you know, we hear all the time that science understands only a certain percentage of what the brain is for.
Certainly.
And the rest of it is, you know, a total mystery and we don't know anything. And it's always occurred to me that part of that may be an area that is more well-developed or more sensitive or sophisticated and can receive signals that many people cannot. I do believe there's a difference in levels of sophistication among people.
There is, and that's a very good point. There's also scientific basis to back that up. The wiring of our brain is referred to as axons. And scientists have found that people that are more intelligent seem to have more, they have more axons. Basically, they have more going on, more electrical connections within the brain. And they can brain map and see where electrical flow is, and if people have an abnormally high level of electrical activity in the brain. When it comes to spirit communication, it's believed that the pineal gland, now for people who do yoga, the third eye chakra, we've all heard of that. People talk about the third eye. Well, actually, about 4 inches behind the center of our forehead, inside of our brain, is a small gland about the size of a lima bean known as the pineal gland. And the pineal gland regulates our circadian rhythms. When we wake up, go to sleep, it secretes melatonin, the hormone which helps us sleep, but it also regulates how we perceive light, and it controls our brainwave frequencies. And the British, who've been very advanced in psychic research for at least since the 1930s,
Wow.
have found that there are traces of magnetite and calcite crystals inside of the pineal gland. What was the first?
More or less developed between people who can see and who can't?
Well, the first radio was a piece of quartz crystal with copper wire running low levels of electricity into it. If we have calcite and magnetite crystals, which are in our brain, and magnetite has an electromagnetic field, and we know the brain has an electrical field, we have a radio station in our head. And so there's the apparatus. So some people have been studying this for a very, very long time. And, you know, the quote unquote, the jury's still out, only because maybe we don't have the technology yet to conclusively prove this. But what we do know when studying the unknown is that the absence of evidence doesn't mean, or the lack of evidence doesn't mean the absence of evidence. It
Right.
just simply takes time.
Well, so you talk about, I had no idea that the British were doing studies on this since the 30s. I don't know anything about studies being done.
Well, they had a psychic warfare division in the 1930s,
Wow.
which is, it's one of the lectures I give, and certainly other people at the time. Adolf Hitler had an entire division of witches under the command of Heinrich Himmler. They actually had a black magic division in the German High Command, and this is one of the lectures that I give.
What was their goal? What did they get from that?
To win the war by any means possible. Well, because
summoning spirits to help them?
Spirits to give them advice. And Hitler used to drive his generals crazy because he used to be consulted by astrologers, and he wouldn't make a particular move unless the stars were in alignment. And also they would put hexes and curses on people, and also that it was all tied into the Nazi occult. The Nazi beliefs were quite complex, and God, we could do an entire show on that. But what's really cool about this, Janet, is that after France the French army folded and the Germans annihilated it, and then they began the Battle of Britain, where every day for 4 months they were bombing Britain mercilessly. and the U.S. was bogged down in the Neutrality Act. Well, Gerald Gardner, who was the father of the modern Wiccan movement, summoned all the witches of Great Britain
My
to
goodness.
deforest in southern England. So hundreds of witches are coming. It's supposed to be secret, okay? But when you get hundreds of witches from England, Scotland, and Wales all going to this forest, and they were going towards the last crescent moon during the summer, and they called it Operation Cone of Power, where they started. They focused all their energy and power and directed it to Hitler's brain and said, "You will not cross the ocean. You will not come. You will not cross the ocean. You cannot come." Well, this gets out, and the BBC picked it up and ran a story that even the witches of Great Britain are fighting Adolf Hitler. Well, you can say that this is all fanciful, nonsense, except within 30 days of that, the RAF started winning the war and they started shooting more German planes out of the sky. And yes, it could be due to a lot of factors, like the British developing radar, and the Spitfires were pretty darn good, except, according to legend, the cone of power had been used by British witches on 2 other occasions. Once in 1588 to destroy the Spanish Armada, which was going to invade England, and once again in 1805, just before Lord Nelson destroyed Napoleon's fleet off of Trafalgar.
Well, let me ask you something about the research, though, because it's just stuck in. Do you work with scientists who study, actual physical neurology?
Oh yeah, I've been hooked up to machines and studied in laboratories. Yeah.
No, but I mean, they take you seriously.
Absolutely, they do. They did in England. They did in Los Angeles and at the University of Arizona.
Well, can I get to, the real question that got me here? So, evidence of eternity, and I am going to get the book, but can you just give us a couple of examples of what evidence there is? I mean, if you're open enough, I suppose it's all over the place, the evidence there is. But
well, it's a lot of the things that I was just describing earlier about brainwave frequency and alignment. The laws of physics support this. And as Nikola Tesla said, what one man calls God, another calls the laws of physics. And what I was talking about with Albert Einstein about there's no matter, there's only energy that vibrates a different frequency. That energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another.
So you're talking about actual physical molecular evidence.
Well, yes, but this also involves energy, and that's what spirits are, is energy. And so when spirits communicate with me, I just don't tell people, "Oh, your grandmother's here and she loves you." I give them actual facts, verifiable things that I couldn't possibly know, and that's the point of evidential mediumship. And that's a number of the illustrations in the book are to explain those things and then show how they were verified. Spirits give me a tremendous amount of medical information about the people that I'm doing readings for. I was at a public event, I won't say where, but there's a couple hundred people there. And this young couple, they're in their early 20s, stood up, and the spirits came in. It was for the wife, but then they targeted her husband. And I said, "There's something very serious going on in your lower abdominal region, and you got to get this checked right away." And they're like, and they're rolling their eyes. They're being very disrespectful and downright rude. And I said, "You need a blood test or something about your white blood." "Oh, I'm fine." I get an email from them a month later, and the wife said, "We really wish we would have listened to you, because a week after you did that reading, my husband's appendix burst. And it was so serious, they had to remove his colon. And the surgeon said that if only we'd had a blood test, a simple blood test would have shown an elevated white blood cell count, and it would have tipped us off to what to look for." And the thing is, Janet, I've got hundreds of examples along those lines. Usually,
I would believe that, because I would believe that there are, obviously, like you would say, changes in energy when your body is doing something dangerous. And
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And then, there's funny things that happen too. Spirits can be hysterically funny. They can bring up, well, I was, okay, talk about evidence. So I'm doing a reading for this woman, and her husband comes through, and I get octopus. I go, octopus? And I go, boy, I keep seeing an octopus. And she goes, oh my God. I go, what? She said, well, she goes, we used to live in Belize and we lived on a canal and we'd catch lobsters and put them in this tank overlooking the water. One morning, my husband and I came out with our coffee and there's an octopus climbing up out of the canal and grabbing our lobsters. Do you think that's what he's talking about? I go, well, unless you have another octopus story, I'm kind of thinking, yeah. And we were laughing about that. I mean, how many people have an octopus story? If I said puppy, I mean, everyone's got a puppy story, but, and these are the type of things that spirits will transmit to verify it's them.
Well, there's an artist who lives not so far from me in San Francisco Bay Area named Jill Culver. And she was a corporate person all her life. And she quit one day to become an artist. Didn't even know she could draw at some point. I mean, it's not like she grew up. And she started to do what she calls soul portraits.
Yes.
And I don't know if you know about her, but you send her a picture of yourself. She does portraits from photographs, so she can do them from all over the world. And she sends you back a soul portrait of the spirit of you. For example, one woman, she drew this woman wearing this beautiful white lace mantilla, and and Karen didn't know anything, Jill didn't know anything about the person, but her grandmother was Spanish and did have that exact mantilla, which this woman had in her closet.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
On and on and on. And it is so bizarre. And you can't not believe in it, because there it is right in front of you with Jill Culver.
Exactly. So, and that's, that's another form of what I do, is bringing forth evidence that people couldn't possibly, I can't make this stuff up.
How do you relate? Do you have anything to do with past lives, people in their own past lives? Or is that a separate thing altogether?
Yeah, that's a separate thing, but see, that's also not evidential. I have seen, now the problem with mediumship is it's fraught with charlatans.
Yes.
Like I've seen these ridiculous physical mediums that make people sit in the dark, or these so-called channelers that sit there and talk in these goofy voices, usually with an English accent. Apparently people with Russian accents never communicate, only, oh, yes, and they spout fortune cookie philosophy and all of this unsubstantiated rubbish, garbage. To me, that's just pathetic. And I really wish people that did that would just stop. Or the ones that make you sit in the dark while supposedly ectoplasm's coming forward. And I've witnessed a few of those frauds. That's the nicest word I can use. And that's the downside of mediumship, is that the history of it is fraught with fraud. And that's why I turn to evidential mediumship, because the objective of evidential mediumship is not only to communicate with the spirit, but in that communication, bring forth verifiable facts and evidence that I have no basis to know, no foreknowledge of knowing, that can be verified. And a lot of the times, Janet, the things that are transmitted to me, I don't know what they mean. And well,
that would make sense.
Well, I was doing a session for these two women, and their mother's spirit came through and began to talk about their sister, who's alive and well. She just wasn't in the reading. And the mother's spirit kept giving me Michael, October 11, 10, 11. And the sister said, well, Mark, of course, we all know somebody named Michael. I mean, who doesn't, right? And they said, but we can't think of anyone significant. And nothing in our family has happened in October. So we don't know what October 11th, 10/11 is about. So I said, don't worry about it. Let's just move on to the next piece of information. 6 weeks later, they contacted me. They said, well, we figured it out. On October 11th, Hurricane Michael hit our sister's hometown, and she had her baby 3 weeks early on October 11th. And we were laughing about that. Then I'm thinking, God, your poor sister. I mean, childbirth is challenging enough, but during a Category 5 hurricane, that has got to be a really tough day for that woman. And so their mother's spirit was letting us know this. But the thing is, it was a future event. And why would they have thought about October 11th? Because the baby, wasn't born until 2 weeks after the reading, which was on October 11th. And we were thinking Michael was a person, not a hurricane. So there's a period of reflection and afterthought. Also, it takes time. Each piece of evidence that comes through, Janet, it's like the piece of a puzzle, and you have to get all the pieces, and then they start coming together, and there you'll have the understanding.
Well, I want to thank you for doing this with me. It's always been an 8-lane highway inside here, and you've just added another 2 lanes and an on-ramp. So I want to thank you for that. It's all of this is so compelling, and it's I think for most people, it's hard not to believe that there is some communication or some connection, at least, between the present and the later.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Janet, as a gift to the listeners of Love Letters, if they would like to book a reading with me through my website, evidenceofeternity.com, if they mention your name or the name of the show, Love Letters, they'll qualify for a reduced fee session with me.
Okay.
And you can find out about that through my website, evidenceofeternity.com. Go to the book a phone reading section. And also, I'd like to invite people to sign up for my newsletter and follow me on social media. And that's just like my book, evidenceofeternity.com.
Well, when I post this on my Love Letters Live website for the talk show, that I'll put in links to all of this.
Super. Yeah,
so
because you've been kind enough to have me on your show, and so I want to do something for your listeners.
That's very sweet of you. I mean, I didn't really do it out of kindness at all. I was so curious and so eager to meet you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor. Thank you. The honor is mine. God bless you.
Okay. That's so nice. And to all our listeners, I'm just going to say goodbye for now. And thanks to Mark Anthony. And we'll talk later. And by the way, Mr. Anthony, if there's anything else you'd ever like to focus on and talk about and do this, let me know. My invitation will stand permanently.
Well, I've got a lot of topics to discuss, and with the holidays coming up, that's very difficult for a lot of people. So maybe we can talk about coping with the loss of a loved one at the holidays. And I've got a number of stories that are essentially love letters from heaven.
Okay. Oh, well, okay. You're mine. Okay. Thank you very much. I'll tell you goodbye for now.